They don't walk in with a sign that says they walk in with charm, with charisma, with attention that feels like sunlight after a long winter. And before you know it, something shifts. You start second-guessing yourself. You begin apologizing for things you never used to. You shrink, just a little, and then a little more. I'll drain your soul. This episode is not just about spotting narcissists. It's about reclaiming yourself. It's about learning to see clearly through the fog of manipulation and building a mind that stays unshaken. Because narcissists don't steal your peace with weapons, they do it with subtle distortions, with flattery that feels like love and control that feels like care. But beneath the surface, it's always about one thing: power. And here's where Stoicism steps in. Not with outrage, not with drama, but with calm awareness, with firm boundaries, with inner clarity so strong even the most charming manipulator can't shake it. If you've ever felt like your soul was being chipped away, like you were losing your voice, your joy, your sense of reality, then this episode is for you. You don't need to become bitter. You don't need to fight fire with fire. You just need to stop giving them access to your peace. Let's begin. 1. They crave constant validation. Validation, it's like air to a narcissist. They don't just appreciate it, they depend on it. And not in the healthy human way where recognition feels nice, but in a compulsive, insatiable way that turns every interaction into a silent transaction. If you've ever felt like someone's attention only shines when you're clapping for them, you may be dealing with more than just ego. You may be dealing with someone who's built their identity entirely on how the world reacts to them. At first, it doesn't seem dangerous. They're charming. They're attentive. They compliment you often, and they expect it back. That's the hidden cost. A narcissist gives, but only to receive. They don't listen to understand. They listen for applause. Every laugh you give, every "you're right" you whisper, feeds them like fuel. But the moment you stop, the moment your attention shifts inward or away, the temperature drops. Their warmth turns cold. Their interest turns into withdrawal. And suddenly, you find yourself doing emotional gymnastics to bring back the version of them that made you feel seen. This is where it begins, the slow erosion of your emotional independence. And this is where Stoicism becomes your armor. A Stoic doesn't base their peace on public opinion. The Stoic learns early that external praise is not a reliable source of inner strength. In fact, the more you depend on applause to feel worthy, the more vulnerable you become to those who manipulate it. The wise understand validation that can be given can also be taken, but the self-respect you build within, that's untouchable. When you're dealing with someone who craves constant validation, you'll notice how quickly the room becomes about them. Your successes, overshadowed by theirs. Your pain, dismissed or worse, turned into a story about their struggle. Even your joy can be threatening if it doesn't include them in the spotlight. And you start to shrink just to keep the peace. You smile a little wider when they speak. You praise them more than you feel. You censor your truth to avoid making them uncomfortable. But here's the truth that sets you free. You are not responsible for managing someone else's emotional hunger. You are not a mirror, a spotlight, or a stage. You are a human being with your own light, your own needs, your own peace. And peace begins the moment you stop playing along. You don't need to confront them with anger. You don't need to expose them or fix them. That's not the Stoic way. You simply stop participating. You let their need for attention pass by you like wind around a mountain. You don't reward their performance with applause. You don't offer validation out of fear or guilt. You observe. You stay rooted. You choose silence over flattery, integrity over appeasement. This kind of strength confuses the narcissist because they thrive on reaction. They need your energy to keep the illusion alive. But when you don't respond, when you hold your ground, they lose control, not because you fought, but because you didn't. And that's the quiet power Stoicism offers, the ability to remain calm in the presence of chaos, unshaken by ego, untouched by manipulation. You might be wondering, but won't they get upset if I stop validating them? Maybe, probably, but that's not your burden. A person who truly values connection doesn't require constant praise to feel whole. They don't punish silence. They don't guilt you into admiration. Real relationships, healthy ones, are based on mutual respect, not performance. So next time you feel that pull, that subtle pressure to say something nice just to keep the peace, just to maintain their approval, pause. Ask yourself, am I being kind or am I being controlled? Is this appreciation or is this obligation? And most importantly, am I shrinking in their presence or standing in my truth? Because here's what matters most. Your peace doesn't require their recognition, and their insecurity should never become your responsibility. You are not here to validate a void. You are here to live fully, speak honestly, and love freely, without needing permission. That's not selfish. That's liberation. And that's how you begin to outsmart a narcissist, not by attacking, not by changing them, but by refusing to play the game at all. 2. Their compliments hide subtle insults. It's one of the most disorienting tactics a narcissist uses, what looks like a compliment but feels like a sting. You hear words like, "You look good today for once," or "You're actually pretty smart. I didn't expect that." On the surface it sounds positive, but underneath it plants doubt. You smile politely, but your confidence flinches. Your brain catches the praise, but your gut absorbs the insult. And that's not an accident. It's a strategy. This tactic is called the backhanded compliment, and it's not just petty or sarcastic. It's a quiet assault on your self-worth. It's meant to keep you slightly off balance, not broken, just unsure. Because when you're unsure of yourself, you're easier to influence, easier to manipulate, and much easier to control. A narcissist doesn't want you to feel powerful. They want you to feel dependent, so they'll offer just enough praise to keep you around, but never enough to let you rise. They give, then take. They lift you up, then clip your wings. Over time, these small digs accumulate like tiny cracks in your self-esteem. You begin second-guessing yourself. You wonder, maybe I'm not that capable, or maybe they're right, I always do mess things up. This is where the Stoic draws the line, not by fighting back with louder insults, but by building an inner wall of clarity. Because a Stoic doesn't evaluate their worth based on public perception. They rely on something far more stable, their own reason, their own values, their own quiet sense of integrity. Seneca once said, "No man is more unhappy than he who never faces adversity, for he is not permitted to prove himself." And this is the key. A backhanded compliment is a test, a small form of adversity, and your job is not to internalize it, but to use it to strengthen your self-trust. You don't need to explain to them how their words hurt. You don't need to get them to understand why you deserve better. You simply return your focus inward. You remind yourself of who you are, of what you've overcome, of how far you've come without their validation. Over time, you stop needing to be flattered to feel secure. You stop needing reassurance after every decision. You stop waiting for external confirmation that you're enough, and instead, you start living in a way that makes it undeniable. That's the Stoic path. And yes, the narcissist will notice. They'll notice your silence, your lack of reaction, your refusal to play the emotional ping-pong game, and they'll either escalate or disappear. Either way, you win, because you've reclaimed your power. So the next time someone gives you a compliment that feels like a trap, pause. Don't react. Don't explain. Just think, I see what this is, and it has nothing to do with me. That's the truth. Their words reflect their insecurity, not your value. Their need to diminish others is proof of their own emotional poverty. A compliment is supposed to lift, not confuse. To empower, not poison. If it does the opposite, then it's not kindness. It's control dressed in charm. And you were never meant to live under someone else's distorted mirror. Instead, live by the Stoic mirror, virtue, reason, and truth. Measure yourself by that, and no hidden insult will ever reach the core of who you are. 3. They never take real responsibility. You'll hear every excuse, every justification, every twist in logic that turns them into the victim, no matter what's happened. A narcissist can betray your trust, ignore your needs, lie to your face, and still make it sound like it was your fault, or society's fault, or their ex's, or their childhood, but never theirs, because for them, accountability feels like death. Admitting fault would crack the image they've built, and they'll do anything to protect that image. At first, this might confuse you. You think, maybe they just misunderstood, or they didn't mean it that way. You give them the benefit of the doubt, again and again. But what you'll eventually notice is this. There's a pattern. They never sincerely say, I was wrong, or that hurt you, I see it now. Instead, they deflect. They rationalize. They minimize the damage or blame your reaction to it. If you bring up a valid concern, somehow it becomes an attack on them. You walk in with truth, and you walk out feeling like the enemy. This is emotional warfare, and it's not about logic, it's about control. If they can make you question your reality, they don't have to face theirs. But Stoicism hands you back the sword of clarity. A Stoic doesn't waste time arguing with distortion. As Epictetus taught, if someone succeeds in provoking you, realize that your mind is complicit in the provocation. That doesn't mean you're to blame. It means you always have a choice: to engage or to rise above, to chase justice through chaos or to preserve peace through detachment. The Stoic knows this. Truth doesn't need to shout. It just needs to stand. And when you stand in truth, without drama, without begging to be believed, you reclaim your power. When a narcissist refuses to take responsibility, you'll feel the pull to over-explain, to defend yourself, to try and make them see what they've done. But they won't. Not because they can't, but because they won't risk the vulnerability it requires. Responsibility would mean growth, and growth requires humility. Narcissism runs from both. So what do? You stop playing the courtroom game. You stop providing evidence. You stop rehearsing your pain for someone who profits from your confusion. And instead, you accept this harsh but liberating truth. Not everyone is capable of real accountability, and that's not your problem to fix. You don't need their confession to find closure. You don't need their apology to move on. You need one thing only: to take responsibility for your response, for your choices, for your future. That's where the Stoic begins. Not in fixing others, but in governing the self. So when someone refuses to own their behavior, don't lose your balance trying to pull them into the light. Instead, walk in your own, and let their shadows stay where they are. They are not your responsibility. Your peace is. And remember, the strongest form of accountability is the one you live, not what you demand from others, but what you consistently practice within yourself. That's what gives your words weight. That's what keeps your spirit free. 4. Charm becomes control. In the beginning, it feels like magic. They notice the little things. They say all the right words. They make you feel like the most interesting person in the room. Their charm is intense, intoxicating even. You start to believe you've finally been seen, finally been chosen, finally been valued in the way you always hoped someone would. But that charm, if coming from a narcissist, is not a gift, it's bait. Because charm, when it's not backed by character, is a mask. It's not who they are, it's who they need to be to win you over. And once they have your attention, once they have your trust, that mask begins to crack. Slowly, subtly. The sweet tone becomes colder. The compliments come with conditions. The attention that once felt so full now feels manipulative, like a spotlight that turns off the second you step out of line. The Stoic doesn't fall in love with masks. They wait, they watch, they understand that time, not intensity, reveals truth. And this is the difference. Charm is instant. Character is consistent. A Stoic isn't seduced by grand entrances or poetic words. They ask, how does this person behave when things aren't going their way? How do they treat others who can't give them anything in return? Are they still kind when no one's watching? A narcissist's charm is never about connection. It's about positioning. It's about creating a false sense of safety so they can access your emotional defenses. And when the charm fades, as it always does, they replace it with criticism, control, and emotional confusion. Suddenly, you feel like you're the one chasing the person who once pursued you. You become addicted to a version of them that no longer exists, or perhaps never did. Here's where Stoicism reclaims your power. A Stoic doesn't cling to illusion. They don't negotiate with inconsistency. They understand that truth is patient. It never rushes. So they observe quietly. They let time speak louder than words. And when someone's charm begins to feel like pressure, when affection turns into expectation, they do not ignore that shift. They honor it. The Stoic way is not to resist connection, but to ground it in clarity, to ask, is this person drawing me closer or pulling me off balance? Is their presence nurturing my peace or disrupting it? And most importantly, am I being loved or just being handled? Because charm without depth is a performance, and you are not an audience. You are a soul, meant to be respected, not manipulated. So when charm becomes a tool of control, when it's used to silence your truth, blur your boundaries, or steer your behavior, that's your cue to step back. Not with anger, not with accusations, but with awareness. Because once you see the playbook, you can no longer be played. You don't need to expose them. You don't need revenge. The Stoic knows that the most powerful thing you can do is not need what they offer, to walk away without drama, to detach with grace, to preserve your integrity without justifying your decision to anyone. And in that moment, you reclaim what charm tried to steal, your ability to choose peace over performance, truth over illusion, and self-respect over emotional theatrics. 5. They gaslight your emotions and reality. It starts small, a slight denial here, a shift in memory there. You say, that really hurt me, and they respond, you're too sensitive. You recall something clearly, an argument, a promise, a lie, and they say, it never happened. You begin to doubt yourself, not just your memory, but your sanity. You ask questions like, am I overreacting? Maybe it really is my fault. What if I am the problem? This is gaslighting, and it is one of the most damaging tools a narcissist uses, because it doesn't just confuse, it erodes. It chips away at your trust in yourself. It makes you dependent on their version of events. And eventually, it makes you afraid to feel anything at all. But Stoicism offers an antidote to this psychological fog, and it starts with one principle: clarity. The Stoic mind trains itself to separate appearance from truth, emotion from reality, narrative from fact. And when someone tries to overwrite your experience, the Stoic response is not argument, it's awareness. Gaslighting works by exploiting your need for harmony. You want to keep the peace. You want to believe the best. You want to avoid conflict. So you bend your truth to protect the connection, not realizing that by doing so, you're sacrificing the foundation of that connection, your self-trust. A Stoic doesn't sacrifice self-trust, because once that's gone, everything else crumbles. As Marcus Aurelius wrote, "If someone is able to show me that what I think or do is not right, I will happily change. But until then, I will stay true to my convictions." That is the key. You remain open to reason, not to manipulation. You honor truth, not denial. And you don't abandon your inner compass just because someone else is uncomfortable with where it points. If they twist your words, repeat what you said, calmly, without defensiveness. If they deny your emotions, name them anyway, not to convince, but to anchor yourself. I felt hurt. That happened. I remember. Not louder, just clearer. You don't need to scream to be heard. You don't need to debate to stay grounded. A Stoic doesn't seek control. They seek reality. And when reality is being distorted, their job is not to fix the other person, but to protect their own mind. Over time, gaslighting turns your inner world into quicksand. You stop trusting your instincts. You overanalyze every interaction. You question your worth. And that's how they win, not by proving they're right, but by making you unsure if you ever were. But here's your freedom. You do not need someone else's permission to trust your own experience. You are allowed to say, "That felt wrong." You are allowed to set boundaries, even if they deny your reasons. You're allowed to walk away from conversations that twist your truth. You don't need them to validate your feelings. You need to validate your reality. And the Stoic knows the mind must be protected like a fortress. If your peace depends on getting someone else to admit what they did, you will stay trapped. But if your peace depends on staying rooted in what you know to be true, no one can shake you. So if you're being gaslit, don't panic. Don't argue. Don't spiral. Just stop. Breathe. Observe. Name what's happening. And then step out of the fog. Walk toward the clarity you were born with. Because the moment you stop needing their version of reality to feel secure in your own is the moment you're free. 6. They drain your energy and emotional space. You don't always notice it at first. In fact, some days you might even feel energized by their presence, their stories, their intensity, their need for you. But then slowly, subtly, a heaviness starts to build. You feel it after every conversation. A strange fatigue, a pressure in your chest, a sense that you gave too much without even knowing how. You walk away mentally foggy, emotionally tense, and spiritually empty. That's not connection, that's consumption. Narcissists don't just seek attention, they feed on energy. Your reassurance, your empathy, your presence, these aren't things they appreciate, they're things they extract. and they do it with expert precision. They confide their deepest wounds, not to heal, but to bind you to their pain. They demand your praise, not to grow, but to keep you orbiting around their need. And the moment you set a boundary, they become cold, distant, or even cruel. Because, in their world, your purpose is to serve their emotional hunger. But your energy is sacred, and the Stoic knows this better than anyone. As Epictetus said, keep your attention focused entirely on what is truly your own concern. Your mind, your time, your inner space. These are not things you owe to everyone, especially not to those who mistake access for entitlement. The Stoic doesn't give away their presence like loose change. They protect it, not selfishly, but wisely, because they know energy is not infinite. And when someone consistently drains you without giving back, it's not care, it's control, it's not love, it's emotional theft. So how do you know when someone's draining you? Ask yourself this: do I feel clearer or more confused after I'm with them? Do I feel respected or responsible for their mood? Do I leave our conversations feeling uplifted, or like I need to recover? Your body knows, your nervous system knows, but often we ignore the signs in the name of kindness, of being a good friend, a loyal partner, a supportive listener. But the Stoic reminds you, kindness without boundaries is not virtue. It's surrender. You are allowed to protect your space. You are allowed to say, I don't have the energy for this right now. You are allowed to step back, not because you don't care, but because you care about yourself too. And that care is not selfish. It is essential. Because when your emotional space is constantly occupied by someone else's chaos, you lose the clarity to hear your own truth. You lose the strength to pursue your own path, and you forget what it feels like to simply be without explaining, fixing, or managing another person's world. The Stoic way is not to shut others out, but to open wisely, to give from abundance, not from depletion, to love without losing, to support without surrender, to be present without being consumed. So if someone leaves you drained again and again, don't ignore that pattern. Don't gaslight yourself. Don't confuse exhaustion with loyalty. Sometimes the most powerful act of love is choosing peace over proximity. Because not everyone deserves unlimited access to your inner world, and you don't need permission to protect it. 7. They feel entitled without contribution. There's a moment in every toxic relationship when you realize something unsettling. They expect a lot, but offer very little. They want your time, your energy, your loyalty, sometimes even your silence. Yet when it's their turn to show up, they vanish. No effort, no reciprocity, no awareness of what they're taking. Why? Because they believe they deserve it by default. That's entitlement, the quiet assumption that the world owes them something simply for existing. And when that entitlement lives in a narcissist, it becomes dangerous, because they don't see love as a two-way street. They see it as a one-way supply chain, where your role is to provide, praise, and absorb their emotional needs while asking for little or nothing in return. And if you do ask for something, if you ask for clarity, respect, or emotional effort, you're accused of being too much, too demanding, or ungrateful. This dynamic isn't always loud, it's not always abusive. Sometimes it's masked by politeness, charm, or even kindness. But underneath it all is a deep imbalance. They believe they should receive more than they give. And they see nothing wrong with that. But the Stoic doesn't measure worth by charm or appearance. The Stoic measures by virtue, by how someone lives, not what they say. As Seneca said, it is not the man who has too little, but the man who craves more, that is poor. Entitlement is a form of inner poverty, the hunger for admiration without the discipline to deserve it. And when you're dealing with someone like this, it's easy to fall into a trap of overgiving. You start doing more to earn their affection. You compromise, adjust, explain, hoping that eventually they'll meet you halfway. But they never do, because they were never trying to build a partnership. They were trying to maintain a power imbalance, and your effort just helped them keep it. So what's the Stoic response? It's to withdraw your effort from where it's not reciprocated, not out of spite, but out of self-respect. It's to stop proving your worth to someone who wouldn't notice unless it benefits them. The Stoic doesn't demand fairness. They embody it. And when a connection becomes one-sided, they walk away with grace, not bitterness. You're not here to convince someone of your value. You're here to express it and to share it with those who recognize it without manipulation. Entitlement has no place in love, in friendship, or in any relationship that claims to be mutual. And when someone insists on receiving without giving, they don't want connection, they want compliance. Remember this: your energy is not a debt they are owed. Your presence is not a favor they're entitled to, and your love is not a tool to inflate their ego. You are allowed and expected to ask, what are they offering? Not materially, but emotionally, spiritually, behaviorally. Do they meet you with presence? Do they respect your time? Do they contribute to the relationship, or just collect from it? A Stoic gives freely, but not foolishly. They love deeply, but not blindly, and they never confuse generosity with servitude. So the next time someone makes you feel guilty for setting standards, ask yourself, are they upset because you're being unreasonable, or because you're no longer easy to exploit? Because when you stop feeding entitlement, you start growing freedom. 8. They explode at the slightest critique. You offer a suggestion, not an attack, just honest feedback. You say something like, I felt hurt when that happened, or maybe we could try another way, and suddenly you're under siege. Their face shifts, their tone sharpens, the conversation spirals. You're no longer discussing a problem, you've become the problem. Their ego flares, and what could have been growth becomes a battlefield. This is one of the clearest signs of narcissism, an inability to receive critique without collapsing into rage, blame, or defensiveness. To them, feedback isn't information, it's threat. And when someone's self-worth is built on illusion, any disruption to that illusion feels like war. They don't respond, they retaliate. A Stoic sees this for what it is: fragility disguised as strength, because real strength isn't loud. It doesn't shout or break or twist words to avoid discomfort. Real strength listens. Real strength adapts. Real strength is secure enough to admit, maybe I was wrong. Maybe there's something here I can learn. Narcissists, however, live in a house of glass, beautiful, polished, but fragile at its core. And every piece of feedback is seen as a stone, even when it's delivered with care. That's why they rewrite the story. You weren't being thoughtful, you were criticizing. You weren't setting a boundary, you were attacking. You weren't sharing your needs, you were never satisfied. And just like that, the focus shifts from their behavior to your supposed flaw. But here's the truth the Stoic holds on to. Your calm is not the cause of their chaos. Their reaction is not a reflection of your delivery. It's a reflection of their insecurity. And your job is not to tiptoe around their ego. Your job is to stay rooted in honesty, clarity, and peace, even when they lose theirs. So how do you deal with this kind of volatility? You don't argue. You don't escalate. You don't shrink. You observe. You recognize that someone who can't tolerate discomfort will never build depth. You remind yourself, I am not responsible for how someone chooses to receive what they need to hear. Because here's the secret. People who explode at truth are already at war with themselves. Your words just hit the detonator, and no matter how gently you try to help them grow, if they've built their identity around being always right, they will see every challenge as an insult. But Stoicism teaches us something powerful. You don't need their acceptance to speak your truth. You don't need their approval to set a limit. You don't need their comfort to maintain your integrity. You simply stand still, with strength, with dignity, and with this quiet reminder echoing inside. The truth does not require a reaction, only a witness. So when they explode, let them. Let the storm pass without you being swept into it. Because you don't exist to manage someone else's triggers. You exist to live with clarity, courage, and calm. And when you stop engaging with emotional firestorms, you stop getting burned. 9. They invade your boundaries, then blame you for setting them. It starts with something small, a request that feels more like a demand, a favor you weren't ready to give, a conversation that went too far, and when you finally draw the line, calmly, firmly, respectfully, something shifts. Suddenly you become the problem. You're accused of being selfish, cold, distant, the one who's changed, the one who's making things difficult. They don't see the boundary as a healthy expression of your values. They see it as rejection, and instead of respecting it, they challenge it, then blame you for defending it. This is the hallmark of emotional manipulation, the kind that makes you question if protecting yourself is somehow a betrayal. Narcissists don't just dislike boundaries, they're threatened by them, because boundaries expose the limits of their control. When you say no, they lose their ability to use your guilt, your empathy, your desire to keep the peace. And that's when the blame game begins. The Stoic, however, sees boundaries differently, not as walls, but as windows, not as barriers to connection, but as the very structure that allows healthy connection to exist. As Epictetus wrote, never suppress a generous impulse, but don't let it override reason. Setting boundaries is not about withdrawal, it's about wisdom. It's about choosing where and with whom your presence belongs. If someone crosses your line and then accuses you of being unfair for defending it, that's not love. That's entitlement. That's the belief that your emotional space is theirs to rearrange. And that belief is dangerous. Because the more you bend to keep the peace, the more they'll take. Not because they need more, but because they know you'll give it. You may start apologizing for things you never did. You might explain boundaries you don't need to justify. You begin shrinking, softening, avoiding anything that might trigger their disapproval. And that's the trap. You become more concerned with how they feel than with whether you feel respected. But the Stoic doesn't seek approval. They seek alignment. They don't need to be liked to be at peace. They need to live according to principle. And if someone can't respect a simple boundary, they've already disrespected your essence. So what does that look like in practice? It looks like saying no and not apologizing for it. It looks like leaving the conversation when it becomes toxic and not explaining why. It looks like recognizing that guilt is not always a signal of wrongdoing. Sometimes it's just the emotional residue of someone else's manipulation. And when the blame comes, when they twist your clarity into cruelty, you don't argue, you don't plead, you don't justify your decision to protect your soul. You simply stand tall and walk your truth. Because boundaries aren't punishments, they are declarations. They say, This is who I am. This is what I will allow. This is how I choose to live. And no one, not even the most persuasive narcissist, gets to rewrite that. The Stoic teaches us, when you set boundaries, the right people will respect them, and the wrong people will reveal themselves. And that, in itself, is a gift. 10. You feel like you're losing yourself. There's a kind of erosion that doesn't happen all at once. It's not loud. It doesn't arrive with screaming or slamming doors. It's quiet, subtle. It begins with small compromises, the kind you tell yourself, "Oh, no big deal." You let things slide. You hold your tongue. You shrink just a little to avoid conflict. You laugh at things that hurt. You agree to things that don't sit right. And before you realize it, you're not who you were. You start forgetting what peace felt like. You lose track of what you enjoy, what you believe, what you need. You don't speak the same way. You don't walk the same way. You're no longer rooted in yourself. You're floating inside someone else's reality. And it's not just disorienting, it's dangerous. Because once you lose your sense of self, anything can happen. You become vulnerable to their moods, their expectations, their judgment. You stop living from the inside out and start reacting to survive. This is the final, clearest sign that you're dealing with someone who doesn't want connection, they want control. And the most effective form of control is not external, it's internal. It's when they convince you to abandon your own compass, when they confuse your identity so thoroughly that their voice becomes louder in your head than your own. But here's where the Stoic philosophy becomes not just useful, but life-saving. Marcus Aurelius once wrote, "Look within. Within is the fountain of good, and it will ever bubble up if you will ever dig." That quote isn't poetic, it's practical. Because the moment you realize you're drifting, you must stop. You must return. Not to the person you were, but to the values you forgot. You ask yourself, what do I believe? What do I want? What am I tolerating that violates my peace? And then you act, not in anger, not in drama, but in clarity. Because the Stoic knows the way back to yourself is not through fighting others. It's through choosing differently. You start with small acts of self-loyalty. You say no and let the silence be uncomfortable. You speak honestly, even when your voice shakes. You reclaim your routines, your passions, your time, and slowly the fog lifts. The person you thought you'd lost wasn't gone, just buried under someone else's expectations. And here's the truth that hurts, but heals. If being yourself feels like a threat to the relationship, then the relationship was never safe to begin with. Love should not require your disappearance. Connection should not demand your silence. And peace should not come at the price of your identity. So if you feel like you're losing yourself, stop. Stop explaining. Stop appeasing. Stop waiting for them to change. Start coming home to yourself, piece by piece, breath by breath, boundary by boundary, because the Stoic knows the most important relationship you'll ever protect is the one you have with your own soul. We often think clarity will come with time, but the truth is, clarity comes with courage. It's not time that frees us from toxic people. It's the moment we finally decide, I don't need this to be mutual to walk away. I don't need them to understand me to protect my peace. And that decision, that quiet inner stand, is where freedom begins. The Stoics taught us that external chaos is nothing compared to internal surrender. If someone distorts your truth, drains your energy, disrespects your boundaries, and makes you doubt your own reality, it is not your job to fix them. It's your duty to return to yourself. Your peace is not a negotiation. Your values are not up for discussion. You don't rise by convincing people to treat you better. You rise by refusing to stay where you are not seen with respect. And if you've been entangled in a relationship that's left you feeling small, silenced, or lost, I want you to remember this. You have the right to begin again, and you don't need anyone's permission to do it. Healing doesn't mean you'll always feel strong. Sometimes it just means you're willing to choose yourself, even when it's uncomfortable, even when it means letting go. That's not weakness. That's Stoic strength, quiet, grounded, and unwavering. So here's your reminder. Protect your energy, speak your truth, set your boundaries, and never apologize for walking away from what was never real love, only emotional hunger dressed in charm. You deserve a life built on clarity, not confusion, on mutual respect, not manipulation, on truth, not illusion. And that life starts the moment you stop explaining your worth and start living like it's already known.